After the last video, a lot of people asked me to create something to show a woodworking job. And what I'm going to do is one of the more simple woodworking jobs, which is a base cabinet, something like you might see in your kitchen. And I'm going to show you that with a shelf that's fitted in there. And I'll also show you how to bring in a part that's in another file. We'll do that. We're also going to use some variable sets, because a lot of people said, hey, the spreadsheets are harder than variable sets and we prefer those. I personally still prefer a spreadsheet, but we're going to use the variable set just to show you how they work, get them done. We'll include it for this, so this will be a parametric cabinet. That way, if you're making these kitchen cabinets or cabinets for your garage or for your workshop, you can make them any size you like, and they'll be parametric. So we'll take a look at how to do all of that. We're going to go through that right now. Now, essentially, a cabinet like this, it has two long sides, two short sides, a shelf, and a back. And I'm doing just a miter joint in there. So if we look at the joint up here, you'll see it's just a regular miter. Not doing anything special. What I am doing is I am going to make a slot to drop the back hardboard panel in there. So basically, if I turn off the short side at the top, you'll see that that panel is actually going to be in a slot there. So you can see it's a slot into the back, which gives it a little bit more stability. And if you pin it there, it's going to be good. One of the things that I also sometimes include when I make these cabinets is I put a piece of wood across the back here and I'll dowel that on, but I'm not going to show that in this model. What we're going to do is we're just going to create a very straightforward cabinet and then we're going to assemble it. So I'm going to start with a fresh file. I'll show you how we do that just as a reminder. So before we start, again, I like to show what my version of FreeCAD is. So I'm on version 1, the latest release. I haven't gone to the dev version yet beyond that. And another thing, somebody asked me about my mouse. Mine is in Blender mode. If you look down here, you can switch yours to be whatever you want, but mine is in Blender. If you hover over it, it tells you what that Blender navigation style is. So select is my left mouse button, zoom is my mouse wheel, rotate is my press down my mouse wheel, and pan is a shift plus the center wheel, or I can pan with both my mouse. Now, before we start the sketch, we want to add a variable set. So I'm just going to hit that, and I'm going to put my first property in there. So I'm going to put height in there because I know the cabinet height in there. I'm going to leave the group as base. You can make it whatever you want if you want to add additional group. And then I'm going to make my value for my height is 900 because I know that already, that my cabinets are 900 tall. And everything I work in is millimeters. So if you're doing that in inches, you're about, I don't know, 35 inches, something like that. So I'll say okay. If I click on my variable set, you can see I have one in there. It's height 900. I'm doing that just so that we have the core set ready for when we do our sketch, then we can add more to it. So the first one we're going to do is the long side. So I'm going to create this long side and I'm going to do it. I could do it several ways, but I'm going to do it with one sketch that does the side profile. And I'll show you how we're going to do it. So it's going to come from here. It's just going to be attached there. It's going to be attached there. It's going to go up here. It's going to go off here at 45 degrees. And it's going to come down to here and be attached back here. And then I'm just going to click on that one and make that vertical. And then I can set my height and my angles and all that good stuff. We can do all that right now. So I'm going to, first thing I'm going to do is set these angles. I'm just going to say go here and I'm going to say show variable sets. And it's going to be in my base. And my group is still base. And my new property is going to be miter angle. And my miter angle is going to be 45 degrees. and I'll say OK. And say OK. And now that's set. And if we go look at my variable set, I have a miter angle in there as well, 45 degrees. So now I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to click here, and this time I don't want to create a new variable set, so I'm going to say take that off, and then in here I'm going to say var set, and I'm going to say miter angle. So now that one is the same miter angle that is showing in our variable set right here. So we've done that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to set this height. And we already have the height in our variable set, so I'm not going to show the variable set. I'm going to say this is var set, down arrow, height. My height of my cabinet's always going to be my height, so no need to put prefixes or anything like that on it. And you can see that the result is 900 millimeters. That's exactly what we want. And we're going to say OK to that. And I'm going to use this to see what's happened here. Looks like it turned everything inside out. Now that happens sometimes. All you need to do is just turn it back in the right way. So all I'm doing is taking that vertices and moving it up there, because we went from a smaller size to a very big size. Sometimes that will happen. So don't panic when that happens. You just move it and untangle it. You'll be in great shape. So now we have our angles are already done. We're going to do our thickness now. And again, we're just going to dimension from here to the end point. And we are going to give that a dimension. We're going to click this little expression button, show variable sets. Once again, I'm going to pick the base, and my new property is going to be called thickness. And my thickness is going to be 12 millimeters. I'm just going to say OK. Say OK. So now that's my board, my first board done. And I'm going to close that. And now I'm just going to pad that, because I want to take this profile and pad it. I'm going to do it symmetric to the plane. So that'll keep my plane in the center of this board. And then I'm going to do the same thing again here. I'm going to hit this expression button. I'm going to go back base. My new property is going to be width. And my width in this case is going to be 535 millimeters. I'm going to say OK to that. Fit all. And there you can see I have a sideboard that has the miter on both ends already done. And I didn't have to do any mirroring or anything like, because I could have drawn half of this thing and then mirrored it and made a whole one, that kind of stuff. For this shape where the complexity is minimal, I'm not going to use the mirror there. There's no point. So now what we need to do is to put some holes in it, because we have our shelf and we want our shelf to be held up with a hole. And then we also want to put the piece in the back here for the slot. So we can maybe do the slot first. Let's do that. We just have to make sure that we do it on the right side of the board. So I'm going to do a sketch. I'm going to do it in this plane. So I'm looking at this board. I'm doing it in this plane because that's where that is. And then I'm going to put my slot in there. My slot is very simple. So bring that over here. It's basically a rectangle. And I'm going to do the rectangle bigger than it needs to be, just to pull it out there, because it's easier sometimes to work with bigger shapes than to try and make it tiny to start with and have it all turn inside out on you. Now, I know that my board that fits in the back here is going to be 5 millimeters. So I know that thickness. So I can do that. I can set this to be 5 millimeters. I'm going to make it the board thickness. I'm going to call 5 millimeters, but then I'm going to add a clearance on top of that, just, you know, so that would work if we wanted to. So I'm going to hit this, go with the base, new property, and I'm going to call this back thickness. And I'm going to call that 5 millimeters. So now I have my slot there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to position that slot. And actually, what I wanted to do, let me just go back here. I wanted to add that clearance on there. So what I can do, I'll show you a way to add. If I go here and I right click, I can add a property. I'm just going to call this property, it's a property length. You got to make sure that the type is length. Otherwise you can end up with some weird things, like if it's text or something, that won't be good. So I'm just going to call this clearance. Clearance. There we go. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to prefix the group. I don't need to. So there I have a clearance set at 0. I'm going to set it at 0.2. Press enter. So now I've just created another variable in here that I can use. Now if I go back into here, go back into my expression editor, I can say plus and pick the var set clearance. And you can see that that is going to equal 5.2. Actually, I need to not have that on there. I don't want to add a new entry into my variable set. I just want to use the variables there. So it's 5.2. So now if we zoom in here, you can see it's actually 5.2. It's hard to see it when it's in that orange, but that's basically what it is. Okay, so now what we need to do is to position my piece here. And I'm going to do that. I'll just pick a dimension from there. That's to the front of it. And again, into the expression editor, show the variable sets. I didn't mean to make that tall. Go into base. This property is going to be back depth. And the back depth is going to be half of this, which would be all the way back here, right? So that's half the width. And then I'm going to take off the slot width plus the clearance plus 6 millimeters of additional. So I'm going to drop it in 6 where that slot is. So we'll do that this way. So this can be a calculation. So what we're going to do is we're going to say var set width divided by 2. So that gives us half the distance across here. And then, so that would put the slot right here on the end. Then I'm going to say minus var set. And it's the back thickness minus var set clearance minus, I'm going to just use a number here. I'm not going to make a variable set for it right now. I'm just going to use a number because I want to show you how you add a number. So if I just put 6 in there, you see this has a conniption. It doesn't love that. What I need to do is to say 6 millimeters. And then it can actually calculate the correct amount. And so when I do that and I say OK, oh, it went to 0 for some reason. Let me just have a look and see why. Var set back depth seems to be set at 0 for some reason. And I'm going to close that. Say okay to that. You can see that this is all messed up. And again, I want to show you how to get out of it, because that is something that may happen to you. So this back depth came out as 0. So I'm going to go here in my list of var sets. I hit the var set, go to the back depth. I go here, I can hit this expression, and I can see why is it 0. So it should be 256.3. I'm going to say okay to that again. It's still showing 0. Okay, so we're going to go in and take another look at that. It is width divided by 2 minus back thickness minus clearance minus 6 millimeters, and that equals 256.3. So everything's correct now. What I had to do was to save the file. I closed the sketch, saved the file, reopened it, and everything worked fine. So I don't know why it wasn't recalculating itself. It seemed like it was cached and got stuck. So now our slot's in the right place. Now, next thing we need to do, we have the slot located this way. We want to locate the slot in the vertical. And the way to do that, we can easily locate the center with a construction line. It's a technique I use quite a lot. We're going to take a construction line. We'll dimension that from the bottom. It's going to be the var set height divided by 2. And so that will always be the middle, no matter what we make the height. So that gives us that. Then we're going to tell it that this is that point and that point and that center line. It's symmetrical. So now it's always going to be on that point. And then all we need to do is dimension that line. I'm going to do that with a dimension here. Going to pick that line. And we can call this the var set height plus, and we're just going to use that var set clearance, just so that it's not a coincident line. It can be coincident, but I don't like it to be coincident because that can sometimes cause you problems with modeling. So I'm going to make it 900.2 millimeters, just using the clearance because I can. It's not, it could be, I could add another 10 millimeters. It doesn't matter as long as I'm the whole way across the board. So now that is done. We have 2 degrees of freedom. Those degrees of freedom are not my slot. It's really just this center line. I could give that a dimension and make it symmetrical to this line. That would give us a fully constrained file. So I'll show you how we do that real quick. Just going to turn that back from construction line. And again, I want to make sure everybody saw that. Is when you click this button here, the line with the dots, it switches these lines to blue. Blue are construction lines, white are your geometry. So I just want to make sure everybody's got that, even though I showed it in another video. Sometimes people don't watch the other videos and then they get lost. I don't like that. So I'm going to make that symmetrical there. I'm just going to give this a dimension, and it can be whatever it is. So I don't care what it is. I'm just going to give it that dimension. And now we have a fully constrained sketch. So I'm going to close that. And now what we need to do is we need to know how deep are we going to go with this slot. So you can see where it's lined up here. The slot is in the back. It's on the short side of the miter. So let me just move that over there so you can see. So there's the slot. This is the miter. We're going to take the slot and we're just going to create a hole with it. So we're going to do that now. Create that hole. And then by default, it goes in 5 millimeters. I can see it's going in the right direction. I know this thickness, so I can make this the thickness and then whatever distance I want to leave here. So I can say the thickness minus the clearance, but that would leave me very thin on the outside. So maybe in this case, I want to be a percentage of the thickness. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the thickness times 0.75. So that'll take me 3/4 of the way in. And that will give me a dimension. So let's do that. It's going to move this over here so you can see it. And it's going to be var set. Much like when you're using a spreadsheet, it's the same concept. You just say var set, and then I can say thickness, and then I can say times 0.75. That gives me 9 millimeters. I'm going to say okay. So my slot is 9 millimeters deep. So now I know that I am 3/4 of the depth. And so I can do the calculation for that. When we do that backboard, we're going to do the same calculation. And then that will fit in there. So there's the beginning of the side. Now remember, these sides are actually symmetrical. So I only need to create one side. And then when we do our assembly, we're going to add 2 of these in. So that's the beauty of this. I'm also going to just rename this body. I'm going to rename it long side. Just so I keep everything squared away. That's my long side. And now the final thing is we're going to put the holes in here for our shelf. And I know the dimensions for those. So we're going to do it on this plane. And we are just going to draw holes on here. Now there's several ways I could do this. I could just draw the holes and then dimension them all. But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw one hole, and then we're going to figure out where we need the rest of the holes to be. So we'll do linear patterns just to show you how those things work. So I'm going to draw a circle. I don't care where it is. I'm just going to draw it over there out the way for now. Or I'm going to dimension my circle, and I'm going to use my show variable sets again. And my variable set is my base. And this new property is going to be shelf support diameter. And that shelf support diameter is actually 4 millimeters. Now I need to do is position this hole. And so I'm going to do that. And the position of the hole, I want it always to be 25 millimeters in from this back. So this is my back depth. So this is going to be the back depth minus 25 millimeters. That's what I'm going for. So I'm going to just click on the center of that. And then when I go over here, I have that dimension. And I'm going to use my variables that I already have. So I need to turn that off. And I'm going to say var set back depth. And I'm going to say minus 25. And remember, I have to say millimeters for that to work properly. I'll say okay to that. And now it's located where I want it on the back part here. And now what I need to do is locate it up here. And if I think about the first shelf height, I think 200 is probably as low as you'd ever want it. That might even be too low, but I'm going to go with 200. And I'm going to call that my shelf hole spacing. I'm going to call that 200. Say okay. Say okay. And now I have a hole that is located based on the size of this cabinet, the size of the base of the cabinet. Okay, so we are going to say okay to that. And the depth of that, again, can be the same as that slot. So we can say thickness times 0.75 would be a good depth. So I'm going to make it whole. I'm going to zoom in here to make sure that we got the hole going in the right direction. And we're just going to do it the same calculation. So this is going to be my, actually I don't need the variable set. I'm just going to do it as a calculation. So we'll do a var set, thickness times 0.75 should be 9 millimeters again. We'll say okay. And that gives us the depth of our hole. So that way, if our thickness changes, our hole depths will change, our slot depth will change. So that's important to know. Now, I've got one hole in there. What I want is an array of holes, right? So we're gonna take that hole, and we are going to do a multi-transform. And what that's going to allow us to do, if I right click here, I can add a linear pattern and I can make it go in the Z axis. You can see already I have a hole there. And I like to do linear patterns with an offset, not an overall length. And then my offset is going to be my varset shelf support, shelf hole spacing. Say OK. And then the last thing I need to put on here is the number of occurrences. So you can see 2 is already a good amount. 3, if I do 4, I think I've got one too high. So 3 is probably all I need. So I got 3 choices of where I put my shelf. Or I can put multiple shelves in. I could put one up here and one down here, or whatever I want to do. So that's where I'm going to put them. You can choose. You can put them wherever you want to put them. Now, my occurrences, maybe what I should do is figure out, maybe it's the height divided by 300. That will give me 3. So that might be a good calculation to use. So that will change. Let's go ahead and we'll do that. So we'll call it the varset height divided by 300. And it says warning units are going to be discarded. So absolutely. We want that to equal 3. And that's what it equals there. So it's going to do 3 occurrences. If I change the height, it'll change the number of occurrences based on that calculation. Now, so that gives me the first set there. Now I want to do another linear pattern. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to say linear pattern. This time it's going to be in the y-axis. And I know that because it says y-axis right there. And I'm going to do an offset. And then I'm going to say, I'm just looking for where my holes are. That's 100 millimeters, so it must be in the reverse direction. So now I have my holes going over there, 100 millimeters. Well, I know that my shelf depth should be a function of this. So I want to actually put this over here, my shelf depth minus 50 millimeters. Because that will give me, so whatever my shelf is going to be, I want 25 millimeters from the back and 25 millimeters from the front. So it's an inch in either end. That way it's not going to flip up when you put something at the back. Again, you can change that. You can make that whatever you want it to be. But I'm just doing that so it's something that's going to work for me. So what I want to do is I want to figure out what that offset should be. And I'm going to do that by figuring out what my shelf should be. Now, I want my shelf to be the width of this minus this back piece. And then it needs to be inset, let's say 100 millimeters shorter than the width. That would probably be enough. So if we said our shelf depth is the width minus 100, and then we can make this a function of that. So let's take a look here. Let's go in here. We're going to add a property, and we're going to call this one shelf depth. I'm going to say OK. And then my shelf depth is going to equal the depth of my cabinet, which I actually put as width on this one. So varset width, and then we're going to go minus 100. So now I have the shelf depth, and then on this one, I can go in and say my offset is going to be shelf depth minus 50, because we want 25 at each end. And that gives me my shelf holes about where I want them to be. So that all looks good. I think we're in good shape there. I'm going to just say OK to that. And that side is complete. Short side doesn't have anything other than this back slot in it. So this should be pretty straightforward. So again, we're just going to add another body. And we're going to right click on there and rename this one. We're going to call it short side. And then I'm going to do a sketch. And I want my sketch to be on this plane. I'm just going to sketch it down here. So this one, I'm going to do a polyline again. I'm going to just do it the same way I did the other ones. Going to go this way to here, back to there. That's basically the profile. And then I'm going to give this angle we're going to call that offset miter angle. Do the same thing on this end. Bar set, miter angle. So I have my 2 miters done. Then I'm going to give this a dimension here. And this is going to be my cabinet width. I'm actually call it cabinet width. Probably what I should have done is instead of calling this one width, I should have called it depth. But it's okay. We're going to call this one cabinet width. As long as it's unique, it doesn't matter. My cabinet width is going to be 535. Okay to that. I'm just going to give that one of those. It did the same thing over here, so we're just going to grab one of these and just bring it back the way it's supposed to be. And then I'm going to hit there. And I'm going to call that the thickness. And now we have our profile for the top and bottom. And we're going to pad that. We're going to pad it symmetric to the plane. And we're going to pad it here. And there's my top and bottom. So again, they're symmetrical, so we only need to do one. And then we're going to put that slot in the back. We'll just do exactly the same thing. We're going to do another sketch. We're going to do it on this plane. And we can see it needs to be there because I can see the one off the long side. I'm actually going to turn the long side off for a second. And I'm going to bring that back in the middle. Just draw a square. That. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the center first because it's easier to pick on it while it's bigger. I'm going to put this line here. And I'm going to tell it that this line is set cabinet width divided by 2. So now we can see our slot is in exactly the right place. It's 9mm deep. Everything looks good. We're going to say OK to that. And we'll turn our long side back on. You can see our 2 slots should be lining up now. Everything looks good. So now to do the back, we're going to create a body. We're going to rename that. Guess what we're going to call that? We're going to call that back. And then we're just going to create that sketch. And we're going to do it on, you don't have to do it on this plane, but it just makes things make more sense. So I'm going to do it on this plane. And it's a simple centered rectangle. I'm not going to use any of those dimensions. I'm going to give it some dimensions here. And that's going to be bar set width minus bar set thickness divided by 2. One here is going to be bar set height minus bar set thickness. Close that, pad that, and the pad thickness is going to be the back thickness. So now I have a back, sides, top, bottom. And what we're going to do is create one last thing, which is going to be the shelf. And I'm going to rename that to shelf. Do a sketch. It's going to be on the XY plane. Again, I'm going to turn all these other pieces off. And to turn things off, you just highlight it, press the space bar. Centered rectangle. And then dimension here. So this is going to be var set width minus var set thickness times 2. And then I'm also going to just take another 4 millimeters off it just to give it some clearance. Say okay. And then this one is going to be my shelf depth. Var set and shelf depth. Close that. Pad that. And the padding on this one's just going to be thickness. It's going to be the same thickness as everything else. So var set and then thickness. Again, you can pick your own names. You can call stuff what you want to call it. So now I have the long side, the short side, the back, and a shelf. Now I have already previously modeled the shelf supports. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you include those from a separate file. So there's everything I need. Let's see how it assembles. Now for the assembly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all of these over here. And you can do them individually, or I can just go to the part and say, turn it all off. That way I don't have all of that showing up where I'm doing my assembly. Now I'm going to go into the Assembly Workbench. Remember, we're picking assembly, not assembly 4. If you have that as an option, don't pick that. Pick an assembly, and then we're going to create a new assembly. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to include some parts. What I do when I'm doing an assembly, as you saw in the last video, I'm not going to bring too much in one go. What I do need to do is to bring in something and make it my locked piece. And I have already told it that it'll do that by default. So now this is locked. So I just brought in my side and it's already locked for me because I told it just do it always. Always bring in the first part and make it locked. If you want to change that, you can actually unlock that piece. And then what I want to bring in is a short side. And I'm going to attach that short side. And I might bring in the second short side to do that as well. And for this short side, I'm just going to bring it up out of the way. And then I'm just going to say okay. Now, it doesn't matter if you move them when you bring them in, because you can always move them later. So if I go to short side 1 and I want to move that out the way so I can get this to connect, it's all fine. It all works well. Now, the thing I want to check is to make sure my slots are all on the right sides. Well, they're not. So this one, the short side 2, is actually the wrong way up. So I'm just going to flip him over just so it's almost the way I want it to be. And then simply we're going to create a couple of fixed joints to put those together. So the first joint here is going to be a fixed joint. I'm going to pick this line here. And then I'm going to do a fixed joint with this line here. Those are together. Then I'm going to fix this piece. I'll fix this line with, oh, now I nearly made a mistake there. I nearly made a mistake. I'm going to cancel that, show you what I did. I didn't say okay. You got to get into that mode of saying okay. So I'm going to do it again. Here's a fixed joint. It's going to be that top line with that top line. And then I say okay. Because if I just go on and make another fixed joint, what it does is it changes the parameters you have in your fixed joint, not what you want. So now I'm going to do another fixed joint. It's going to be that inside edge with this inside edge. That's rotation. So I need to just hit that as a 180. And there it's rotated into the right spot. Have my slot going all the way around. Everything looks fantastic. Let's say okay there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide the back piece in next because I can see the slot, so it's easier to do it that way. So I'm going to take the back piece, back, fixed, and we're going to pick that edge. And we're going to pick fixed. We know that's the back edge. Okay, now I look like I'm in the right spot, but I'm 180 degrees off. And there it is. So now I have my board in there, and then I'm just going to bring in my other side. So I'm going to say OK to that one. I'm going to bring in my other side. I'm just going to put that where we can see the whole thing. Bring it in. I'm going to go long side. And I'm just going to move that long side over here. And again, that's going to be the wrong way around. So I'm just going to flip it. Like that. Say OK. And then I'm going to just join this side, this line, with that one there. And he's also needs to be 180 degrees. Say OK. And that looks good. Now I have the cabinet is all together. All my miters look good. Everything looks like it all fit together. And now what we want to do is we want to bring in these shelf supports. So to do that, I'm going to say I want to add a part, but this time I'm going to open a file. And when I open the file, it's going to ask me, where is that file? And I know mine is in here, in this shelf support. So I'm going to open that. And what it does is it brings that file in. And there's my shelf support. So now I can add, I want 4 of those in. So I'm going to bring 4 in. 1, 2, and notice it's counting them up as I bring them in. 3, 4. I'm going to say OK. And now I have 4 of those supports. They actually ended up in the back here. And I'm going to move them sort of closer to where I want them to be. So we'll take a quick look here. Going to grab that and just bring it over here. Grab that one, take it over there. Grab that one, take it over there. And we'll just bring that back to the middle. One of the things is when I'm working with something this big and I'm putting in a small part, I might want to zoom in on the part itself. So if I select that and I want to zoom in, if I use this one here, it's fit selection. So now it'll zoom in wherever I select to. So if I go to my shelf support and I say zoom in to selection, it goes right into that piece. And then I can just zoom back out from there to see where those holes are. And then I'm going to decide which holes I want to put my shelf in. I'm going to put it in the lower one, I think. I'm going to put it in this one. And one thing I would recommend when you're doing this is to line these up the way you want them. I kind of want that to be, I'm going to just zoom in there a bit. I want that to be up the other way. That way. That red one. So that's kind of the angle that I'm looking for. Because what I want to do is I want to put this in as a fixed joint rather than a rotational joint. And the reason for that is if I put it in as a rotating joint, it's going to keep moving around every time I solve the thing. It just doesn't work very well. So I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to bring this down a little closer. I'll show you how to get one in there. So we're going to do a fixed joint. And I'm going to do it from here. And I make sure I get that circle there. I'm going to go back to the hole here. Into this hole here. I want to make sure I get the hole. And you can see it's fixed that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate it 180. Say OK. And now that's my first one in there. And I'm just going to do the same for all of these. I'm not going to make you watch all that. So we'll do that. So I put all of the supports in. And somebody asked me, why would you bother modeling something that you're going to make woodworking wise when you can just write down a few dimensions and then cut everything the way? Well, here's a good reason why. So if I go here, spot the issue. When I put those holes in here, I didn't put them in the center in the vertical direction. So now what's happened is my holes because one of these boards is upside down to the other, the holes don't line up. So if I put my shelf in there, it's going to actually be cattywampus. So that's the beauty of having parametric models, is we can go in and we're going to go in and fix that. And I'm going to show you how to do that. And the reason I'm going to show you is because it could be a real world thing for you, is that not everything goes perfectly the first time. And so you do have to change things from time to time. And I'm going to show you how we can change that. And the way we're going to change that is we're going to go back to part design. I'm going to turn off my assembly. And we're going to go back into part design. I'm going to turn back on my part. And I'm going to right click and make my part the active object. And it's important to know about that, as making things active objects. And I'm going to turn off my short side, the back, and the shelf, because we don't need any of that for now. We're going to focus in on our long side. We're going to go back to where we made that hole. So there was a sketch where we made the hole. And the issue is I arbitrarily moved 200 up and did not put it in the center here. So we are going to fix that. We're going to go back into part design. And we're actually going to go back into that sketch. So to edit a sketch, you just double click it. And here we are. So if you remember, I did this as the shelf spacing to the first hole. And if we think about it, because I started this at the bottom, I need to do a little bit of figuring just to make sure I've got that right. And I'm going to just come up with that real quick. So the calculation for that is pretty straightforward. What we do is we take the length and we divide it by 300, because that's how we decided how many holes we were going to have. So that gives us 3, because we're 900 divided by 300. So that'll be 3. And then our hole spacing, which we have at 200. And we times that by 3 minus 1, because there are 3 instances, so there are 2 gaps. And that'll give us 400. And then 900 minus 400 divided by 2. That will give us this height here. So it should have been 250. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that calculation in here. So my calculation is my height minus the shelf hole spacing times the height divided by 300 minus 1, which will give us a 2. And then divide all that by 2. And that gives us 250 millimeters. And so now all that's left to do is to set that to my first hole height. Pop that open. And we're going to call this first hole height. And then we'll close that. And now if we turn off our part, close that. We'll go back to our assembly, turn that back on. We're going to make the assembly the active object. And then if we turn this, you'll see my shelf magically lines up. So that's good. And then the final thing we need to do is just to add back in our shelf. And we'll drop that down somewhere close to where we want it to be. I'm going to bring it out front like this. And what I'm going to do with the shelf, I'll say okay to that, so the shelf's in. What I'm going to do with the shelf is I'm going to make a slide-in joint for the shelf. So I'm going to actually put it a little bit further over here. And I'm going to make a slide-in joint between the top of one of these and the bottom of the shelf. So we'll do that right now. Zoom in here. We're going to do a slide-in joint. We're going to pick that line, and then we're going to rotate around here, and we're going to zoom right in there, and we're going to pick this line back in here, just like that. And now I'll say okay to that for a second. Now my shelf is in there and it should slide back and forth. And let's just take a look from the side. You can see my shelf is coming all the way through the back because it doesn't know that it needs to stop. So what we do, I'm going to just zoom in so we can see when it comes back there. I'm going to go back to my joints. Here's my joints here. the slider, double click that. I'm going to push this back and watch these numbers here as they change. I'm going to go back till you just see that line just disappear. And right there, I'm going to make that my max length. And just to give that a try, I'm going to pull that out of there and see if I'm going the right way. Oh, it should be my min length, so I'm going to just change that to my min length, and then I can pull it out, push it back. It won't go all the way through the back there. I'm going to say OK. Sometimes when you do that, it defaults back to a position that's back there, and then when you try and pull it, it won't pull out. But if you move it around a little bit and then pull it again, it'll come out. I think it's again a little bit of a glitch, but it's all good now. So that's in. I have my shelf in. I have my cabinet all together. I have the back in. I have my shelf supports in. Everything looks good. And although it's taken a while for me to do this in a video, when you do it yourself, you'll find once you start adding pieces in, it does make it fairly quick. The other thing is I've only had to create one side, one top, and the shelf and the back, and then I'm just adding parts as I go now. Some questions, comments, things of interest. I think the interesting part of this is the var sets as well. So remember, you have this var set. I can now go into my var set and say, what if my cabinet was going to be 1200 tall instead of being 900 tall? If I change that, my cabinet is now suddenly 1200 tall. And now one thing it did do is it created an extra set of holes, because the number of holes is based on the height of the cabinet. When it did that, it moved where those supports were. So I would have to adjust those supports to put them back in the right hole. Just be aware that some things can change if you're adding additional features. So I'm going to change that back to 900, and we'll see if it actually changes those back. Yeah, put them back in the right hole. So that's good. If we went down smaller, if we went to 600 maybe, we might see that change. Or we could do our cabinet width. We could change that to be maybe 750. And you'll see my shelf and my back and everything has changed to suit that. I'm going to change my width, which should have been depth, to be honest with you. The width I'm going to change to 365 just to see if that all works. And now we've got a thinner cabinet. And again, I allowed 100 on the front there, so you have a gap before you get your shelf. You can choose whatever numbers you want, what makes sense for you. And remember that you can, if I wanted to zoom in on this part, for instance, I can go to that shelf support, select it, hit this guy, and there I am right in close on the shelf support. So hopefully you found that useful. If there's anything else you would like to see, this is what I would do if I was building this cabinet. I would actually guarantee I would do it this way, because that allowed me to find that error. And the last thing I want to do is to put those holes in and then put my cabinet together and then realize I messed that up. So that's the beauty of having these 3D models that you can change, 3D models that you can test things out with, that you can see how it all fits together. All looks great. Oh, one other thing I can do, if I want to check how that's fitting into there, I can go to this part. Now what I do is I click on it and it highlights the part so that I can see which one I need to highlight. I'm going to just turn it off. Then I'm going to go in there and I can see that my board is actually pretty nicely into the hole there. Everything looks good. You can see how it's all fitting in. Makes it nice and sturdy. So you can do that. You can turn things on and off. So if I wanted to lose that side, I would click on that side so I knew where that side was. It's that long side there. Just press spacebar, and now that's off. And then I can see how that fits in. Or you can equally, I can turn it on and I can change its transparency. So I can toggle transparency. So now I can see through the side and I can see where my shelf is fitting, and I can go back and I can turn back on my short side there. So I got that on, but now I have a transparent side, so I can actually see how everything's fitting together. That's the beauty of the assemblies, as you can see how everything is all fitting together there. Okay, any questions, any comments? Love to hear them. The more you do these assemblies, the more you put these things together, the easier it gets, and the more benefit that you get from it. Again, we can do a bill of materials for this, but if there's something else you'd rather see, I'm more than happy to show you that, or to work with you on it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. It's important because it helps me to keep making the videos. And then if you want to join our Patreon, you can certainly do that. If you want to just become a member on YouTube, you can do that. Or you can just go ahead and buy us a coffee. The coffee equals, one coffee equals one beer. Happy days. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the videos. I hope I'm providing you some value. I hope I'm providing you things that you want to see. I hope I'm making things clearer, not more complicated. Unfortunately, I can't explain every single piece of this. It just would take too long. So it does help if you're interested in the FreeCAD and how CAD works. Take a look at the wiki. Take a look at the documentation. Take a look at other videos online as well. And what will happen is you'll get a better understanding for how all these things work. I try to keep it, a reasonable length. These are quite lengthy videos. I can't do every single thing. But if you have a question, feel free to ask it. If I can answer it, I certainly will do that for you. So, appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.